Now, there's one more criteria that we need to consider and look at when trying to determine the year of the rapture, okay? And that is the Shemitah and Jubilee cycles. We get married in a Shemitah or Jubilee year, but you cannot harvest in a Shemitah or Jubilee year. Now, the rapture consists of three parts. You have the resurrection, you have the gathering of the living, and you have a subsequent harvest. Okay? This is going to take place over a 2-year period, but the actual timeline for Jesus is 1 year and 10 days. He will come on Feast of Trumpets on 1 year, and the following year on Day of Atonement, which is 1 year and 10 days later, we know that Jesus will finish his part, and then he will send the angels to gather this last part of the harvest because they cannot fly. They have new flesh bodies, but they cannot fly, so the angels will have to come get them. Okay? We know that God's calendar year is running from around May 1st or 2nd to the end of April the following year. So when you look at this timeline right here, imagine these lines being from January to December, okay? So God's calendar year would run from about May in 1 year to the end of April in the following year. So this blue shaded area right here represents God's calendar year. When we talk about the wedding of the bride and the lamb, we're looking for Shemitah and or Jubilee years. Okay, so we would get married in a Shemitah or Jubilee year, but you cannot harvest in a Shemitah or Jubilee year. So when we look at our Jubilee cycles, and if you go back and watch that video that had all the Shemitahs and Jubilees in it, what you're going to find is that this 7-year period right here is going to be running on 2 different Shemitah or Jubilee cycles. Okay, and if you stop and think about it, it has to be that way because this is in fact a 7-year period. So if you're running on 7 years that are all on the same Shemitah or Jubilee cycle, you run into a problem over here at the end where you have another Shemitah or Jubilee cycle right here where Jesus will not be able to come and gather the people. But if we're running on 2 or even 3 or 4 different Jubilee cycles, it won't matter that this is a Shemitah year for this particular cycle at the beginning because this will be on a different cycle than the one here. Okay? So just like all the other criteria we've looked at so far, we can actually take this one and relax it a little bit and see it 2 different ways. Okay? We can look at this and say, this is a full-blown harvest. And we can look at this one and say, this is a full-blown harvest. But if we relax this criterion just a little bit, we're going to see different results in terms of the years. All right? This harvest right here, one could argue that this is for children only, and that the adult Jews are going to be fleeing to the wilderness, that no adult Jews will be taken right here, except for the 144,000 who are taken right here. Okay? If that's the case, and there's nothing but children that are being taken while the adult Jews are fleeing to the wilderness, then one could argue this is not a true harvest. If you recall the pictures that I drew in earlier studies, and I showed you how the seed sprouted out of the ground and became a little baby plant, and then it grew and it became a youth plant, and then it became a flower, but it wasn't yet harvested, and then you had the 3 harvests, the first fruits, the main harvest, and the gleanings of those flowers, right? Well, if you look at the first 4 stages of that flower's growth, one could argue that's not a true harvest. Therefore, we could argue that this taking of the children right here is not a true harvest. Therefore, this year could also be a Shemitah and or Jubilee cycle, and it wouldn't matter. So if we had like a Shemitah in this year and a Jubilee in this year, it would not matter because this is not considered technically considered a harvest. Okay? Or we can look at this and say, yes, this is absolutely a harvest. Some of the adult Jews will be taken while the others will flee, and therefore this cannot be a Shemitah or Jubilee year. So we'll look at both. Okay, I went back and wrote these down for y'all real quick. We had 5 different timelines we were looking at: the fall of Adam, the creation, the Israel becoming a nation, Israel when they got Jerusalem, and the American or Gentile timelines. Okay? And I wrote down the Shemitahs and Jubilees so you could see them right here. Y'all can come back and look at these or study these later. But what I want to show you is if, and this is an if, we take all the criteria that we've looked at up until this point, including this criterion right here, and we take everything at face value, and we say that everything must fall into place exactly the way that the criteria suggests, okay, then we can only come to one conclusion. 2025 to 2032 is the only timeline that will fit into all the criteria we've discussed in parts 1, 2, and this one. And we take them at face value, and we take them exactly as they're supposed to be. 2025 is the only year that will work. So just a quick review. If we keep everything at face value and we say that the moon phase has to be in the first or second week, possibly the third week, but not the fourth week, and possibly not the third week. If we say that the Jewish Hanukkah must be on or near Christmas time, that the year of the resurrection must be the end of the timeline either for us or the Jews. If we have to complete the 2,000 years in conjunction with Psalm 90:10, and we use the year 1948 as the year Israel became a nation, and we look at the Shemitah and Jubilee cycles in terms of pre-trib and mid-trib when the 2 harvests are gathered, there's only one cycle that fits those, and that's 2025 to 2032, using the the Jerusalem timeline and the fall of Adam timeline combined. And I'm sure that there's 2 others for the other 2 groups that are gathered, but I'm not looking into those. I'm only looking at these right now, okay? If we relax some of these criteria and we say that the Jewish Hanukkah does not have to be at Christmas, that Jesus said he would raise us up in the 3rd day. And y'all, there's nothing in the Bible that says it has to be at Christmas. That's just something that we are considering based on the wording of the ascension of the 2 witnesses, okay? And of course, Revelation chapter 4 as well, because John mentions those who are gathered alive as being the menorah or the candlestick, okay? Jesus said he would raise us up in the 3rd day, so that prophecy implies that it's possible we could go a little bit beyond the 2,000 years if that's what God wants to do. And of course, the blood moon tetrad of 1949 and 1950 stretches this 1948 out a little bit longer, okay? If we say there's no harvest at mid-trib, like I just discussed, and if we say that the Jews getting married at mid-trib is a second marriage, which it is because God divorced the Jews. So if it's a second marriage and they're getting remarried, then do we need a Shemitah or Jubilee year? Since they're getting remarried, we may not need another Shemitah or Jubilee year for that marriage, okay? If we relax those criteria, we can find at least 2 other options. 2028 with the fall of Adam timeline and the creation timeline, and then 2 other timelines for the other 2 groups. Or we could possibly look at 2030 with the American or the Gentile timeline, where the mid-trib of this timeline does not have to be a Shemitah or Jubilee at all, okay? So just a brief reminder what the 1 year and 10 days is going to look like, because these are the days of Noah, right? So, like I said earlier, Jesus will show up at Feast of Trumpets, but then he will be, quote unquote, gone by the Day of Atonement of the following year. In other words, he will be done gathering 1 year and 10 days later. So from Feast of Trumpets of this year to Day of Atonement the following year will be his 1 year and 10 days. That's his days of Noah. Because remember, his timeline is in blue, ours is in pink. All right? Our timeline is running from Hanukkah to Hanukkah based on the symbolism of all the feast days and the fact that this is a pseudo tabernacles. Jesus will fulfill the real tabernacles, okay? It appears, based on my studies, what God has taught me, that our 1 year and 10 days is going to run from about December 21st, it should be down here, of this year, to December 31st of the following year. So that's 1 year and 10 days, okay? So if the Jewish Hanukkah is in fact around Christmas time, our timeline would be running from Hanukkah, the Jewish Hanukkah, to the following year when this final group is taken around Christmas time or the end of the year, and then they ascend 40 days later on God's true Hanukkah at the end of January. So we still get this 1 year and 10 days from when the first group is gathered to the last group is taken, and then they ascend 40 days later at God's true Hanukkah, the end of January. So it's a little tricky because it's still 1 year and 10 days from here to here, but it's longer than 1 year and 10 days from Hanukkah to Hanukkah because this is the Jewish Hanukkah and God's true Hanukkah. Okay? Now, we could make this January 21st to January 31st of the following year, and it would still be 1 year and 10 days. But because he's incorporating Christmas, it makes it a little different. And here's just a quick, brief summary of what I've been telling you guys all along. You can go back and study this later. That this would be a 2 year process for the rapture. That the year before, or the year of the rapture, that we would start to feel it around Passover. And y'all, these are January to December and January to December. So we would start to feel it around Passover. We would know it at trumpets. And right around the Feast of Trumpets, I don't know if it's the Jewish trumpets on their calendar or God's trumpets on his calendar, they would have the peace treaty. And in my vision, I saw something happening with Israel up here early in the summer, and then they spent all summer working on a peace treaty, and then by the end of the summer around Feast of Trumpets is when they were signing the peace treaty, and then that's when the trumpet would sound. The resurrection will happen here at the trumpets. We will all be changed, but the living will not be gathered until this Christmas time right here at this Jewish Hanukkah, okay? Which is another reason I believe the Jewish Hanukkah must be on or near Christmas time. All right? Then we have the wedding of the bride, the Gentile bride, and the groom. And then during these 4 months right here is when we have the first Magog War. I've told you guys there are 3 Magog Wars. The first Magog War comes in 3 different phases. I've told y'all about that in my other videos. Then after those 4 months, we would gather the harvest, and each group would ascend after 40 days. Your elders, and then you have your bishops, and then your disciples down here. Okay? And here's another way y'all can look at this. Y'all can go back and study this on your own time. Again, it's a 2-year time frame from January to December and January to December. And with that, I'll say, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom.